Episode 6, Midnight over Sarasa Land. Luigi's training sessions went on for 2 more hours, before the two finally decided to retire. By then, it was getting late. Luigi offered Cobalt a place to sleep for the night, since Cobalt had informed him Toadbird was working late. As Luigi tucked his green blankets around him and shut off his mushroom-shaped nightlight, he could scarcely believe the day's events. In a few short hours, he suddenly decided to make a move to return the kingdom's freedom, as well as train some impulsive young Yoshi. He was moving much faster than he was accustomed to. Oh well. He knew what he was doing was right. He hadn't felt this good in years. Especially because of that light glimmer of hope Cobalt had given him. Was it possible that somewhere, far away from Toad Town, Yoshi was giving it his all, fighting a dreadful, near-hopeless battle against the Koopa Empire in its entirety? If that was the case, Luigi would find he swore it on his brother's grave. While Luigi and Cobalt were enjoying a relaxing sleep in Luigi's home, a very different sort of person was out on a midnight stroll. Gregory Goldenshell, age 59, was going about his traditional walk around the town that lay in the center of the area of Sarasa Land's countryside, which was referred to as Daisy Hills by most of the populace, even now when Daisy hadn't effectively held power over the kingdom in ages. Not like that really mattered to Gregory, he was an odd case. While a member of the Koopa Troopa species, he had never visited the Koopa Kingdom before. His family had been citizens of Sarasa Land for generations, and, while he was far from rebellious, he had no real loyalty towards the Koopa Empire or devotion to its monarch. The thing was, unlike for the less fortunate races of the Mushroom World, his life hadn't changed much. It was difficult to verify whether a Koopa was a loyal member of the Empire or simply a member of the species unless if there happened to be a Magic Koopa around. Because of this, every time the troops rolled into town, nobody gave Gregory a tough time. For all they knew, he recited the Koopa Empire's national anthem every night before he went to bed. It wasn't like life in Sarasa Land was all that tough anyways. It was under the control of Morton Koopa Jr., for goodness sake. Even the propaganda-laden news channels of the Empire had failed, despite how hard they tried, to conceal the fact that Morton was not only unintelligent, but had no real aspirations to power. Gregory's life was simple: work his shell of in the day, and appreciate the beauty of Daisy Hills Village's antique architecture in the night. He loved to be out when no one else was around and the only light came from the moon above and the white street lamps that shone down on the cobblestone streets around him. Gregory strode across the empty street, his boots making an echoing sounds through the silent town square. Oddly enough, he could hear a faint sound somewhere in the distance, which he certainly had never heard before on his nightly walks. He dismissed it, though, since it wasn't near loud enough to disrupt the peaceful atmosphere. Gregory made his way to a bench and sat down, gazing at the tall, marble statue of a long-dead king which rose up in the town's center. The full moon was shining down upon the statue and Gregory found himself reflecting, as he had so many times before, on the town's rich history. It wasn't often that a town in Sarasa Land had a monument to a forgotten ruler like this one. He really was living in a window to the past. Gregory closed his eyes, listening to the soft rusting of the leaves around the town and the creak of the windmills that surrounded it. He let the soft, peaceful noises relax him so that he could think more freely. The only problem was, of course, he couldn't hear any of those sounds over that new sound which was getting louder and louder by the second. "All right, what's this racket?" Gregory growled, opening his eyes and standing up. The noise was coming from the air, so he scanned the dark, starlit sky for its source. What he saw made him step back in shock and horror. There, well lit by a multitude of lights, was a terrifying sight. It was a fleet of Koopa Empire battleships, armed to the teeth. These were not the airships of the past years, which had subjugated Sarasa Land and the rest of the world 20 years ago. This was the new and improved model, the airship Mk2. It was more than 4 times the size of the previous model, around as large as that cruise liner Princess Daisy had owned some years back. The warships still had the basic appearance of an airborne seafaring ship, although they no longer had propellers, likely thanks to advanced engine technology. While they were still made of wood, they had abandoned the classical 3 masts design for a more modern one in which much of the deck was covered in a superstructure dotted with turrets. At the highest point of the warship, where the bridge was, there was a spiked dome that mirrored the one which commonly showed up in the emperor's castles. This was not the first time Gregory had seen these battleships, of course. He had often seen them whenever he had headed over to the Sarasa land capital city, since that was Prince Morton's center of power. The main difference in these ships, however, was in the decorations. They were lacking the massive figurehead of Prince Morton's head, and the spiked dome, rather than being brown, was instead a dark purple. The figurehead of the approaching airships depicted another kupa altogether. One with large, pink shades which reflected the moon off their black lenses.
"These are Prince Roy's ships,"
Gregory realized, taking a step back. He wasn't quite sure what to do. There were at least 20 of these battleships, each one armed to the teeth. He had always known Prince Roy had a bit of a reputation, to say the least. He wasn't currently on good terms with his younger brother, if he was ever on good terms with any of his siblings. Was there a chance this was just a diplomatic convoy passing over them on their trip to the capital? Or there was an almighty noise as dozens and dozens of bill blasters simultaneously fired. Hundreds of bullet bills streaked towards the town, trailing white smoke behind them. Gregory instantly forgot all about the quaint little village's historical significance. He was going to be history if he didn't start running soon. As Gregory ran, now joined by a growing crowd of fellow villagers who had been woken by the sound, the bullet bills struck the houses, lighting up the night with orange fire. Even by the time Gregory was far away from his old home and frantically running through the woods, the sounds of the explosions still echoed through the valley, miles and miles away. It seemed, Gregory reflected as he nearly tripped over a fallen log, that even the more relaxed areas of the empire weren't about to stay relaxed for long.